had a spinal injury. I didn't do any pain medication. All we took was Marshall, until I got out. And slowing down your injuries, start catching up with you. Spinal injury was the worst. I ended up having to go to the hospital and get an operation, and then after the surgery, the pain was excruciating. With the pinched nerves and the bone damage, it's a sharp pain. So when they offered pain medication, it obviously helped, but you just don't know what it's going to do to you afterwards. It completely slows you down, slows your mind, your thinking. Oh, it changes your life for the worst. I ended up becoming addicted to it and lost my marriage, the houses I had bought. It just did a lot of damage to my life. See the people I got off of opioids with the help of kratom right after I had stopped taking pain medication. I took kratom probably 4 or 5 hours later, and I couldn't believe it. Drugs and nightmare. Kratom recovered me out of the zone I had gotten into, the pain that I was dealing with. I feel so much better now since I've been down off opioids. Kratom has helped me so much. It's helped me get my life back. Kratom helps you become yourself. If people out there taking kratom, contact your legislators. Tell them we need to protect kratom.
Go to protectkratom.org to tell your elected official to protect kratom.
It is definitely a lifesaver. Save all.
So thanks, Pete. That video, and that's the longest version of it, but we also have shorter versions, will be available on the protectkratom.org and the AKA websites. And we encourage everyone to take all of the videos that we have accumulated so far, and we're building a library of these videos, and share them with elected officials in your area, with stakeholders, policymakers, influencers, and the media. When you see a negative kratom story, there's nothing wrong with picking up the phone, calling the reporter, and hopefully not castigating them, because they typically are reacting to the propaganda campaign from the FDA, but encourage them to see the real story about kratom. And so we'd ask everyone to do that. We did, as everyone knows, a national campaign that attracted enormous attention by staffers on Capitol Hill, by members of the United States Senate and House, state legislators across the country, because it told the positive story about kratom. It told the truth about kratom. We hope that we're going to be able to do another round of those kinds of advertisements, and we really need the help from the kratom vendors and from the kratom community as we do that. We also would invite each of you to provide a synopsis of your personal story. We're going to try to develop a library of kratom testimonials, and if we can then divide them into groups that are local to the state that we're working in, so that these state legislators see actual constituents, that will be a powerful voice that is different from Jack Henningfield testifying in a hearing, or myself, or Senator Bramble, or Senator Carlucci. It is the consumers that really move the needle. We can provide the important policy and scientific information, but it's these powerful testimonials that make a difference. So if you will provide a description of your testimony, and do this for us, pick up your phone and do a selfie video, and tell us your story on camera. That'll help us to assess the kinds of stories. We won't be able to pick every one of you, obviously, but there are going to be people out there with stories about kratom that we don't know right now, and that you may become the star for the day when you do it. So please get outside your comfort zone. Send us a testimonial audition video, And who knows, you may get a call from Pete saying, hey, we want to shoot a video of you and tell your story. We also have a set of written testimonials that will be provided to these state legislators in the areas where you reside. So it's very important for me. The purpose for which we called this webinar tonight was to talk about the upcoming World Health Organization Expert Committee on Drug Dependency that is going to be convened next Monday on the 11th. This is an extremely important meeting, and I know that there's a lot of discussion about what's going to happen, how is the meeting going to work, and what has the expert committee done in terms of accepting the request for testimony. The expert committee has allowed 2 hours of testimony for 7 different substances. It is our understanding that the vast majority of responses have come from the kratom community. Some detractors, and obviously they will try to balance that out a little bit, but we've had some of the world's leading scientists request an opportunity to present evidence about kratom. And so, and by the way, this is European Central Time, so it starts at 10 a.m. in the morning. They're 5 hours ahead of us here in the United States, so that you know. So this means that this event's going to take place in the middle of the night in the Eastern Time Zone, and the late night in the Pacific Time Zone. So that's a little bit of a hurdle, but you can sign up by going to the WHO site, and you can observe it if you choose to do so. We don't know yet exactly who has been accepted to provide testimony. We know some. We know that the AKA was granted a slot, and I'll be representing the American Kratom Association. Dr. McCurdy applied and was granted a slot. Jack Henningfield and Marilyn Eustace, who is one of the leading forensics toxicologists in the world, formerly worked with NIDA, and is renowned for her ability to do analytical research on the cause of deaths, and she will be providing testimony that will be critical to address the misinformation that was provided to the expert committee, that was evidenced in the pre-review report that was submitted to them, that classifies deaths around the world as allegedly caused by kratom, most of which, as all of you know, are referenced here in the United States and directly the result of the disinformation campaign that is being carried on by the FDA. In preparation for the meeting, we have had contact with advocacy groups around the world. We know that several scientists in Europe have been granted slots to speak based on those advocacy groups. We know that some public policy officials in Thailand and Malaysia were granted spots based on the advocacy groups that we've collaborated with, and we've had consultants and legal advisors in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Malaysia, all working hard to do it. We have put a full court press on Indonesia. Unfortunately, because of the turmoil in the Indonesian government about the recommendation from the BNN in Indonesia to schedule kratom, we have been unsuccessful in getting a firm commitment from anyone on the government side to present any information. But we're hopeful that the growers groups will be accepted, and perhaps a few growers that have individually asked in order to make a presentation. We really won't know until the meeting starts exactly who is been granted those slots. We're trying our best to gather information prior to the meeting. The presentations in terms of the thrust of the arguments that we're going to make, Dr. Henningfield is obviously going to emphasize the 8-factor analysis redraft that he just completed here a month ago, which essentially outlines the case as to why the FDA's arguments that kratom should be scheduled under the Federal Controlled Substances Act simply don't hold water. And he has added and chronicled an additional new 100 studies that have been put into publication about kratom since 2018, when the last evaluation, independent evaluation, was made of the FDA's recommendation, and the Assistant Secretary for Health at that point, Brett Joie, rejected and formally rescinded the recommendation from the FDA, from the Drug Enforcement Administration. And that was a groundbreaking decision because it protected us from eminent scheduling that we didn't even know about because of the secrecy that the FDA had used in doing that. So we're hopeful that that very same scientific argument will be heard by and accepted by the expert committee on drug dependence. I'm going to ask Jeff to kind of describe from his perspective this process, who the expert committee is, and what we can expect them to be influenced by in their evaluation of their pre-review of kratom. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mac, and good evening, everyone. And let me, before I comment on that, I'm also trying to follow the chat. We have nearly 200 people on here, and a lot of you are expressing some disbelief that there's only 2 hours and several substances under consideration, et cetera, et cetera. Mac, when I'm done, or at some point this evening, I want to suggest that you give our viewers here some detail of the overall process. What I want to say about that is everybody, we are, as Max said, putting on a full court press, but at the same time, don't freak out. This is step 1 or step 1A of a several step process. What we're trying to do, of course, is to kill it in its tracks. If we can't kill it at step 1, there will be other opportunities to do our work, but I wanted to just say that at the outset. An important thing to remember is that this committee, in front of which folks will testify and who are reviewing all of these thousands and thousands of comments, they're a bunch of scientists. And just like all of us, they want to hear from their peers. So when they're getting testimony, frankly, whether it's in person or via Zoom or in writing, et cetera, the very fact that the kind of scientist allies who are speaking with us, for us, on our behalf, that really matters. I spent most of my federal career working at the NIH and most of that time working at NIDA. This is something I actually know about. Scientists want to hear from and want to trust other scientists, especially research scientists. So the fact that we have these folks who have been granted slots is great. The other thing another thing to think about is even those who have been given slots to speak, they get a short time to speak, 5 minutes. There isn't a human being alive who can say everything they need to say about this topic in 5 minutes. Don't worry about that either. They will hit the highlights, just like in any congressional testimony that any of you may have witnessed in the past. Your oral statement is 5 minutes. You give your top 3 points, and then you repeat them once or twice. But the written statement, the formal statement with all the citations, with all of the full-blown arguments, that information is already in and will be highlighted, and we will be going on and on and on about it. So I don't want any of us to be flip or unnecessarily, it's not that we shouldn't be optimistic, but we don't worry about our voices not being heard. Scientists will hear from scientists, and the amount of, there's zero question, the amount of evidence that we have is overwhelming. Whether and how that gets taken into consideration at each step of this process, we are doing everything that is allowable to not only get it in front of people right away, but to therefore convince them, they just don't need to go further. Hopefully that works at step 1. If it doesn't work at step 1, we have a few more steps to make that happen. But the very fact that the recipients of the information are the same kinds of folks as the providers of the information, and frankly, all these people probably know each other. I don't know that for a fact, but there's at least some good overlap. That will matter a lot. So, Matt, let me stop there and pick more of that up if we need to later.
Great, Jeff, thank you. And what Jeff said is absolutely correct, and this is an important point. The members of the expert committee on drug dependence are scientists. They are less likely to be influenced by the political headwinds that are created by some of these advocates for banning kratom, because we ask consistently that we follow the science, that we look at evidence-based conclusions rather than just the speculative or the advocacy to criminalize drug products. And so that's I think, the ace in the hole for us. In terms of process, the expert committee on drug dependence received a request for this review from the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs. It is impossible to determine exactly which member state of the of the treaty obligation that the UN oversees actually made the recommendation. We are aware that Singapore and the Philippines had raised these issues about 4 years ago, largely at the instigation of the US FDA. We also know that when you look at the pre-review document that was sent to the expert committee and published early in September, includes most of the references that come from the FDA. So it is not a far stretch to conclude that whether they did it directly or whether they used a surrogate, the FDA is behind these recommendations. And it is a cynical third attempt now. They failed twice in the United States to get it scheduled here because they couldn't meet the scientific criteria applied by the Controlled Substances Act. So now they're taking the end run, trying to influence an international body with disinformation as they go forward. So what the expert committee will do on Monday is it's a public meeting for the first 2 hours, and they continue their meeting through the end of the week, probably to the 15th or the 16th. Then, and it's an all virtual meeting. Typically they meet and they get in a room and there's a lot of interchange. This is a little less interactive because they will be working in a Zoom kind of environment. But they'll have these deliberations and they will continue to have these private discussions for the 4 days that follow the 11th. And at the end of that time, they will make a decision. They have 3 potential decisions that they could make. One is that they could conclude that they have heard sufficient evidence that would justify a scheduling recommendation to be sent immediately to the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs. We don't think that that is reasonably in any outcome that could be expected because we know that the scientists that have been selected are going to be able to provide a persuasive case that the scientific evidence does not justify that conclusion. The worst case is that they would go to a pre-review, which would take 1 year. So they would take from October of this year to October of 2022 when they meet again, and they would then make the determination. And in that 12-month period, they would hire outside experts. They actually issue a request for proposals. They try to get the best and brightest scientists from around the world, and they assign them to do specific research on various elements of the criteria they use for scheduling to determine whether kratom would be a candidate for scheduling under what's called the 61 Convention or the 71 Convention. Very technical kinds of issues that involve which treaty obligations, and it impacts what decision the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs could do. But that would take a year, and if they did, in the worst case, recommend to the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs that kratom was scheduled, then about 5 months later, the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs would meet and they would ratify that decision. Now, it's possible that they could say, no, we don't care what the recommendation was. We don't see the merit of this, and that is as probably equally unlikely as it would be to say that they would go into immediate scheduling recommendation at the expert committee level in October of this year. So it is more likely that the expert committee will either say that there is not sufficient evidence right now to proceed and they would continue with kratom under surveillance, or they could say that we think that there is sufficient evidence to go to a critical review, but with skepticism. And then a year from now, they could then say, we've evaluated it, looked at it, and so we're not afraid of that 12-month review, by the way, because science is powerful, and I'll tell you in a second why we're not so afraid of that. But it would still keep the controversy alive. And so we're hopeful that the right decision is made right up front where they say there's not sufficient evidence to proceed. We will prepare for the worst case, however, in our strategy going forward. We think that the best thing that can happen in terms of science is for there to be continued scientific battles and research to continue. We know that the updated 8-factor analysis is on its face a powerful document because it itemizes and categorizes all of the new science and highlights all of the science that undermines what the criteria that's required for scheduling with the expert committee, whether the product is addictive, whether or not it's a gateway for other drugs, whether there are societal harms, whether there are death counts adding up. And just to give you an example, the AKA has completed a safety study on kratom, and I think some of you may have heard me speak about this in the last couple of weeks. This is a study that will be peer-reviewed and published probably in December or January, so it would be published during any period that the expert committee, if they were to continue their review of kratom, it would be available for the October 2022 meeting if they decide to go to a full critical review. That study, in essence, says that using the FDA's gold standard for safety studies, it's called the oxycodone profile, where they know, the FDA knows, and any researcher knows exactly what the death counts will be on the test animals and the adverse effects based on the dosing of oxycodone. And they then compare that to the substance that's being studied, in this case, kratom. At the end of the day, every expected outcome of the oxycodone-treated animals occurred. There were multiple deaths at the trigger points where they were expected. With kratom, at hundreds of times the dose level that a human could consume, there were no deaths and no significant respiratory suppression on those test animals. The data will blow them away because it is powerful, and when it's published, after it's been peer-reviewed, it will be a document that will be virtually impossible for anyone to argue that kratom is unsafe for human consumption. What we know is that the problem with kratom products, to the extent that it exists and there are deaths associated with it, comes from polydrug use, meaning that kratom is being used by populations seeking to ameliorate their acute and chronic pain, or they've gotten hooked on opioids for recreational purposes, and now they're seeking to wean off of them. And we know from the research that kratom is an effective tool to help people wean off of an addiction. The Johns Hopkins study documented that 87% of the study population reported that the kratom helped to reduce and lessen the withdrawal symptoms, which are the critical factor in getting off of opioids, and 35% were opioid-free within a year. So that kind of harm reduction data will be persuasive to any scientist who looks at it, and you couple that with the safety profile of kratom, it makes it very difficult for there to be any decision by any credible scientist to say that this is a substance that needs to be scheduled and banned internationally. A collateral, powerful argument that has been made by the advocacy groups that we've collaborated with is about the criminalization of kratom. If you schedule it, and this is the very same argument that Senators Booker from New Jersey, Senator Gillibrand from New York, and Senator Wyden from Oregon made in their 2016 letter to the DEA. There were 9 senators that signed one letter, and then 3 signed this letter, talking about how the drug enforcement policy in the United States has been an abysmal failure. We have put people in jail for possession of low levels of marijuana, and we've made them into criminals. We've overcrowded our criminal justice system. We have targeted a population that would be better treated with other kinds of remedial treatments rather than criminalizing them. This is the sweet spot for Thailand. The officials in Thailand are incensed at what the FDA has done. They have gone through, the FDA, but what the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence is doing, because they have gone through this process. They had kratom banned since 1943. They looked at the science, they looked at the public policy, they looked at the harms that criminalization had created in their country, and they've completed that review process, and they came to the conclusion that the best thing to do was to decriminalize the growing and possession of kratom and to regulate it appropriately. And that's, of course, what we argue for as the best protection for consumers, to appropriately regulate the kratom marketplace. And that's what we do with the Kratom Consumer Protection Act and what the FDA should be doing. So we are relatively confident that the presentation that we are prepared to make will be heard by this group of scientists, and that the worst case would be that we will spend a year amplifying that scientific record in order to justify their decision in October of 22, and maybe even this year, to say that there is not sufficient evidence to justify the inclusion of kratom in any international treaty on either the 61 or the 71 conventions that would then trigger the process of scheduling of kratom in the United States, because the treaty obligation requires member state countries to then initiate and fulfill on banning of these substances in their countries. So that's the stakes that we're playing on here, and we are confident that we're going to be able to make the best case scenario and allow this expert committee to come to the very same conclusion that an independent reviewer in 2018 did in the form of the Assistant Secretary for Health, who is the designated official under the Controlled Substances Act to make that independent evaluation. And they said, and he said, that the FDA had produced disappointingly poor evidence and data, and that they simply did not meet the burden, and that new research, emerging research in 2018 had contradicted what the FDA was saying. And now here we are in 2021, 3 years later, with 100 new scientific studies that make that case even stronger. So again, that's the basis for the presentation we're going to make. We're going to make it the best foot forward we can. We've spent an enormous amount of money on this and getting the best consultants, the best legal teams, and advocating with some of these advocacy groups around the world. We're building a strong coalition that will help us right now, but it's going to strengthen us in the future because we build all of these relationships, and we're going to continue to fight globally to make sure that kratom is protected. So that's the description of the event. So what we will do on the AKA landing page, by hopefully tomorrow, we'll have up the links where you can go and register to watch. We will have the actual description of the process for this whole expert committee on drug dependence review, and then you can take that information and obviously circulate it. We'll also have the videos up that you can take a look at and circulate those to your friends as well. Before we conclude, and we'll take some questions and answers here in just a minute, I wanted to talk about our progress on the KCPA at the state level. As all of you know, we have successfully had passed 5 states now that have passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, which puts in a regulatory scheme that bans adulterated kratom products, requires companies to use good GMP standards, proper labeling, and restricts kratom on an age limit depending on the jurisdiction. We are making great progress. Now, we know that in the state of Texas, we got thwarted only because of the Messian fight between the Senate and the House down there, and they adjourned without acting on the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, which was on the consent calendar. We expect that when the legislature in Texas reconvenes, they meet every other year, so we'll be off for a year, that they will pass that quickly. And by the way, an interesting sidelight, Brian Harrison, former Chief of Staff at the Department of Health and Human Services, and our champion who helped us stop the ban that was going to be implemented by the FDA in 2018, who collaborated and recruited Dr. Joie to actually do the evaluation, won his seat in the special election to the Texas legislature. So we will obviously have a great advocate in the state of Texas as they reconvene. A similar situation occurred in Missouri. We had a unanimous vote in the House of Representatives in Missouri. We had a unanimous vote out of the Senate General Laws Committee. It was placed on the consent calendar in the Senate. Same problem, they adjourned because of a Medicaid fight. But we're sure that that bill is going to pass swiftly in Missouri. In the state of Oregon, we had overwhelming passage in both the House and the Senate, and the governor vetoed it. And everyone should understand that the governor didn't have any opposition to kratom. She told us that the problem was that the Department of Agriculture got leaned on by the FDA, where the FDA told them, don't expect us to cooperate with you on the host of products that we work with you on if you are going to be regulating kratom. And of course, we have been negotiating with the Department of Agriculture and had come to an agreement with them, and they accepted the responsibility, and that's what was in the bill when it passed. And then the FDA swept in and threatened them that they were going to have a lower level cooperation. And so the governor said, if you'll pass the bill, and our sponsors have agreed to this, designating a different regulatory agency in the state of Oregon that doesn't interact with the FDA, then she will sign that bill immediately. So we expect that we'll add Oregon to that list too. Great news out of the state of Wisconsin. Today the bill is filed. It's Assembly Bill 599. It has been referred to the Committee on State Affairs, and we should hear about the first hearing in Wisconsin here in just a couple of weeks. In Ohio, The hearing has been tentatively scheduled, but you can pencil it in if you're from Ohio, for October the 19th, which will be the proponents' hearing. And Senator Bramble, Dr. Henningfield and I will be there to provide testimony on October the 19th. But these things, these state battles require your interaction and your help. I'm going to ask Kurt Bramble to tell us his impression of the influence that these testimonials had when he attended the Ohio Board of Pharmacy scheduling hearing, where we had over 300 kratom advocates show up. So Kurt, if you want to unmute yourself and kind of describe from your perspective the influence that these kratom advocates can have on public policy makers.
Thanks, Mac, and welcome everyone. You know, in politics, I really appreciate Jeff's presentation about the science and how scientists will listen to each other. In politics, the strongest case is when you touch someone's emotions, and you touch someone's emotions in a positive way. In Ohio, we packed the committee room, we packed the hallways. The heart-wrenching stories, the heartfelt stories of real people who had been addicted to opioids, whose lives were being destroyed by narcotics, that found kratom. The folks that are experiencing depression and need a pick-me-up. Those are the stories, the personalized stories of people that the legislators know. There is nothing more powerful in American politics than touching that kind of a chord. When we went to Wisconsin, it's interesting. Kratom is banned in Wisconsin, so we're going to have a hearing. They packed the state house. In Ohio, in Rhode Island, it is wherever we've been. And I'll be in Ohio, I guess next Tuesday, a week from Tuesday, testifying in a committee. I can tell my own personal story of a family member who died of an opioid overdose. But I don't have the same influence with a legislator in Ohio or Wisconsin or Rhode Island or wherever we may be going, that someone that knows the legislator knows the constituent, and they tell their story. Because those emotions, the impact, the power of telling that story. That's why we put out these public information commercials with individuals telling their story. That's why we started this tonight with the story of someone who put on the uniform, put his life on the line for America, and has found kratom. And so as we're moving forward, particularly at the state level, you need to do all you can to get the stories told in a way that legislators can hear them. So Mac, thank you.
Kurt, thank you, and no question that is exactly what happens in those hearings. And I wanted former state senator from New York, David Carlucci, to give his perspective, because he came to this issue from a very interesting point of view, which was the ban kratom initially. So David, do you want to kind of give your perspective on how your journey to the decision to support the KCPA actually came into place?
Yes, thank you, Mac, and thank you everyone for being here tonight and for all your work. And really, I'll echo what Kurt said, that it's so true. The personal stories is what moves politicians. Like Mac said, I served in the New York State Senate for 10 years, and all of that time, I co-chaired the Addiction Task Force. And you can imagine the past 10 years, some of the things that have changed, the stigmas that have changed. But I came to kratom because I had heard some articles I had read, the FDA's information putting out about the dangers of kratom. At that time, in about 2015, on the state level, we weren't looking at regulating, we were looking to the federal government to do that. So I put in legislation that would ban kratom. And for me, it was the best thing because I heard from thousands of people from throughout New York and throughout the country that shared with me their personal story. And I was touched and I was moved, and I saw that as I heard from people and their stories, and I pushed back against what the FDA was saying, I found that it just was faulty, the information that was provided. But the bottom line is that like Mac had asked you to do, that if you could just take out your phone and record your story, and before you go to sleep tonight, make sure that you look up and find who your state lawmaker is, your state senator, your state representative. And I'll tell you, the most powerful thing you can do is tomorrow, give them a call. Call their district office. And if you don't talk to them, you'll talk to a representative, you'll talk to their staff, you can leave a voicemail, but tell them your story. Make sure that you do that, because, how do you get a miracle going? You do everything you can. And I know from talking to thousands of lobbyists, well paid over the years, that the thing that moved me was the personal stories. And then the people that I actually got to see, because when you're a state senator, you're drinking from a fire hose, and people want to come see you. And the people that I would see are my constituents, the people that live in my district. And if somebody lives in my district and they want to have a meeting with me, I accommodate that. And that's why I'm saying that it's so important that you tell your story and record the video at a minimum. But tomorrow, latest tonight, to look it up, give you the night to think it over, but go and call your lawmaker and share that story, because that's what moves everyone. And we talk about the science, but Kurt is exactly right. And Mac has said this before, that unfortunately, it's often that science and logic do not equal policy in the United States. And that's why the emotion is so important, the stories are so important, and that the lawmakers see your face and know that you're a constituent, and they have to listen to your story. So, Mac, thank you for giving me a few moments today, and please continue to share your story, because that is the power, and truth is on our side, and we will win as long as we can tell our story.
Mac, let me take one more minute, if I may, to give an example of two stories. Many may have already seen the videos, but it's the story of two Lauras, Laura Daw and Laura Romney. Laura Daw is a nurse. She's a nurse that's a cancer survivor. During her cancer treatment, chemo and radiation, it caused irreparable neurologic damage that was causing her to have excruciating migraines, and the pain was intense. It was her husband that was the House sponsor of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act here in Utah. But even with her husband being a sponsor, she was a skeptic. It wasn't until a little over a year after we passed the bill that Representative Daw called me. He said, "Kurt, my wife is at the end of her rope. The opioids aren't working, her pain medication isn't working, she's depressed, she has nowhere else to turn. Can we try Kratom?" Now, Laura Daw she's a nurse, she's a scientist, and she's a cancer survivor. She took some Kratom powder, very carefully measured out the quantity, mixed it, and took it. She kept notes. She said, after about the first 15 minutes, my pain diminished from a 9 or a 10 to a 1 or a 2 and became manageable. And my sense of well-being, my sense of optimism increased, kind of like a caffeine jolt that you get in the morning from drinking a cup of coffee. She said, I thought it was psychosomatic, and so she let it go. She just kept observing and making notes of her own condition. About 4 hours after she took that first dose, the pain returned. She said, well, it might have just been mental, so she didn't take Kratom again for a couple of hours. She took a dose again, the same thing, she had the exact same experience. Today, Laura Daw is an unwavering advocate. She's an evangelist for legalizing Kratom and distributing Kratom to folks that need pain management. Laura Romney, again, same story. And when Laura Daw talked to legislators that know her, when Laura Romney here in Utah talked to legislators that she knows, and she knows legislators across the country, that's far different than scientists talking about the biologic, biochemical reactions, MU receptors, and all of that. It becomes very personal, and it touches a very clear note. So, Mac, thanks for letting me take another minute.
Thanks, Kurt, and those are great messages. We're going to do our best to focus on the target states that we've selected, where we have good advocates, we've got lobbying people who are on the ground, we've got a well-organized Kratom Protectors program. And by the way, we want everyone to join that. I know that some have tried and they feel like they haven't been heard. Pete, at the end of this call, is going to tell you where to email your willingness to participate in that program. We're going to do some creative things. We're going to ask, and we're going to put together a list of legislators that we really want to show that we support them. And there are two ways you can show you support them. You can raise your hand and say, I support you, or you can grab your wallet and give them a contribution to say you support them. We're going to give you a list of target legislators that I hope everyone will commit to send $5 to, maybe pick out 5 or 10 of them and send $5 with the note that you're appreciative of their work. And we'll give you the names and the ways to make those contributions. It doesn't take a lot of money, but it shows them that we appreciate them. And we're gonna do the same thing with the vendors to pay a lot more to recognize those legislators who have been so supportive of this plan and of our effort. That's the way politics works. And I did receive a fairly stern complaint from one of our great champions who said, you guys haven't shown me any love in the campaign. So we want to make sure that we cover that side of it as well. That's just the way politics works. So, as I said earlier, we're going to produce by tomorrow the links for the expert committee on drug dependence so you can watch it. We're going to have the links where you can get the information that you need, and we'll give you the pathway where you can sign up for the Kratom Protectors Program that will allow you to join other advocates at the state and local congressional district level, and then implement it into the state level as well, so that everyone has that. And before we open up for questions, Kurt, did you have another point you wanted to make?
I did. When you talk about showing the love, campaign contributions, keep in mind, we are charging headlong into the 2022 general election. Well, there will be the primaries and election cycle. That means every one of our champions in state legislatures that are on an even year cycle, if they're not a 4-year term, they're going to be up for election. If you ever wanted to leverage any kind of campaign contribution, now's the time to do it, because at least half the legislators in the country, probably 3/4, are going to be up for election in 2022. And so now is the time.
Amen to that. Thank you. And we'll have that list up for you within a couple of days. And it'll be on the same area where you're going to be able to gather all this action information as we go forward. So with that, let's go to some information, question and answers, and then we'll have a wrap up here talking about what we're going to be going to do in the next couple of weeks. So any questions anyone has that they want to just raise their hand. Pete, tell me how they go about asking these questions, or you can coordinate by going to the Q&A section.
Yeah, if you go to the Q&A button at the bottom, you can write in your question. We do have a couple of things that I think a couple administrative questions while people have a chance to write in their questions below. People have been asking where can they send their testimonial videos. The best email address to use is videos with an S at the end, videos@americankratom.org. You can send your testimonial videos there, as David and Mac talked about. Just take a quick selfie video, send it in, and we can actually use that video, but we also might want to do a longer video that we can use and share, and so that would be fantastic. The one person asked about the AK GMP standards program, when that was going to be relaunched. Well, actually, it's great, very timely question, because it relaunched earlier today. And we initially sent it out to everyone on our vendors list. If you did not get that email, I'll send it out again to as wide a list as I can. But you can always send questions to gmp@americankratom.org. gmp@americankratom.org, or you can go to the americankratom.org website and look at the updated program, what are the updated standards and requirements, and again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me and the team at gmp@americankratom.org. Mac talked about the Kratom Protectors Group, formerly the Kratom Consumer Council, now the Kratom Protectors Group. We have a little over 500 members of that group, and we try to hold monthly calls, and we're going to have a little bit more activity moving forward, but unfortunately a lot of that is sitting around for a little while and then sheer terror for 72 hours as we find out that a proposed ban is coming up in your state and your area. And frankly, we had that very situation just this past week in Mississippi. where in Lee County, they were going to come and discuss possibly banning kratom in Lee County. So we were able to activate the Kratom Protectors Group. And Bethany, who is our chair in Mississippi, did a fantastic job of getting other congressional captains to actually go to that Lee County meeting. So we're going to look for more ways where the Kratom Protectors can get involved, but there is a little bit of that. There's not a lot of activity, and then it is sheer panic when we, not panic, but targeted strategic outreach that we have when we find out a potential ban in your state. But we need more folks part of that Kratom Protectors Group. We need to expand the base of advocates for Kratom, and so you can send me an email at KP, it stands for Kratom Protectors, kp@americankratom.org. I know I'm giving you a lot of different email addresses right now. We're recording this, the call, and I will include all of these emails in the email that we send out when we have the recording.
Pete?
Yes, sir.
Let me respond to one comment that I just pulled up, and I'll read it verbatim. So the science is not good enough for these politicians. We have to buy them. You're not buying politicians. We have advocates. We have allies. We have elected officials that support our cause. The reason you give a campaign contribution is we want to get them reelected. We want to keep them in office. You're not buying their influence. What we're trying to do is keep them serving so that they have a vote on the floor of their chambers. There's a big difference there, and just want to clarify that. This is not giving a campaign contribution so we could garner support. These are folks that are already carrying the banner into battle for us. We just want to make certain that we get them reelected so that we can get the votes that we need in the chambers when the bills come up.
Absolutely. So Mac, I know you've touched on this, and I know Jeff touched on this a little bit, but I've heard this question now a couple times, or seen this question a couple times. What do you think our odds are here the upcoming week that we're going to be successful? I know that's a little bit of an unfair question for you, but what are you thinking? What's the landscape? I know we have a plan in place if it doesn't go our way that we feel very confident about, but how are you feeling about going into this meeting next week?
So I'm not a good odds maker because I told the AKA when they hired me in 2016 that they had no chance of getting the scheduling recommendation rescinded because the EA had never rescinded a ban that was initiated by the FDA under the emergency powers of the Controlled Substances Act. So I'm not a good odds guy, but I can tell you that as pessimistic as I was then, and I was wrong, I am optimistic here because you have a group of scientists, not politicians, and you have the science, the evidence-based science that will persuasively argue that the criteria that is established in the law, in the treaty, is not met. And so I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to make that case either to get them to defer any action in this meeting next week, or if they go to a critical review, to do so critically, so that when they evaluate it over the course of the year, that all of the science, and by the way, it is hundreds of scientific articles in total, and this is a fairly new discussion at the UN level and WHO level, so I think that maybe that year will give them sufficient time to fully evaluate all of the science because it's overwhelming. If this decision is based on evidence and on data and on the science, we win. And that's what we're going to have to keep the narrow focus of this expert committee on. And so I'm very optimistic that we're going to prevail either next week or, and by the way, they won't announce their decision next week until December. That's when they make a formal report. We may get an early warning on that, but December is the time when they'll announce their decision when they report to the WHO. And that will then trigger a report over to the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs. So no one should expect an answer on this until December.
Yes, thank you, Mac. You read my mind. That was the next question that I had for you. Mac, I just want to take a little bit of a tangent here. We're getting a good amount of folks asking about where we are with Indonesia. Do you want to just touch on that briefly as far as any sort of potential ban in Indonesia coming up?
So Indonesia is a big disappointment to us. COVID, the casualty of COVID is that we have not had the opportunity to be there to meet in person with these government officials. I have had numerous off-the-record discussions, Zoom calls, with Indonesian officials, but the culture there is very interesting. They want to meet face-to-face. They want to have these discussions, and there's no official discussion will take place over a Zoom call. So we are hoping and praying that this COVID thing is going to reduce to a point that we can get over there. I know that Kurt and Jack Henningfield and I have been anxious to get there for almost 2 years now. We have our tickets purchased, and they were voided because we weren't able to go because of COVID when it first hit. But I think the following things are true. The BNN is just like the FDA. They are not the answer, the end point answer in Indonesia. And despite their current position that kratom should be banned, and that's a very complex issue. It has to do with tariffs. It has to do with revenue to the government. It has to do with their perception of the pharmacology of kratom within their scientific laboratory. And it has to do with the policy that they're trying to contain internally about corruption within the DEA, within the BNN itself. And so they're struggling with this. I've had a number of off-the-record conversations with the deputy, and we're looking forward to having a discussion, unfortunately off the record, with the director of the BNN. But within the next 2 or 3 months, we're hoping that COVID gets reduced enough that we can get over there. The Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Trade are all strong advocates for the economic benefits of kratom and the potential health benefits based on what they're learning from Thailand and from the 8-factor analysis that has been distributed to them from Jack Henningfield. And so they are more and more coming to the conclusion that properly regulated kratom can be a very good thing for Indonesia. The growers groups. There is a fractionalization among the growers group, some of which was our own making, in that there were some vendors who sold some of the Indonesian farmers that they could solve all of their problems, principally that they're getting paid less than they should be for their kratom raw materials in the plants that are collected, harvested, and processed and sent over here. And they have demonized the vendor community in the United States. These are problems of our own making in some regards, because the processors groups got burned badly by representations by some American vendors that have now been withdrawn, and they had relied upon those representations and money, and now that's gone. And so there's been a backlash by some of the growers, and there is a movement growing where they want to organize, and some would call unionize, the growers over there to stop producing kratom until the American vendors pay them a fair price. My position that I have, my view of this that I've articulated to them that the AK would support is that we want a fair wage to be paid to the growers. Part of the problem there is that there are unscrupulous brokers who go and pay the small farmer and collect the leaves and then take it to the processing plant, and they're making a lot of money. It's like the PBMs in the drug pricing system in the United States. There are people that are ripping off those farmers. They're not Americans, and they're Indonesians. So there's got to be a reconciliation for that problem there. This is a mess right now. And then on top of that, you have the global problem of shipping containers being completely slowed down. You've got hundreds and hundreds of ships sitting out at sea, sometimes for months at a time, and they can't get to port. And so kratom's raw material supplies are being held up there, and then overlaying on all of that is of course, the import alert. We have a plan that we're hoping that either the Indonesian government or the Thailand government will work with us in partnership to get the import alert lifted in return for adequate testing, for ensuring that the product is safe, and let the FDA then regulate it the way it should as a food here, and to whatever extent there are improper GMP manufacturing standards, we can work with that. So we're working hard on pitching this model that would allow for the import alert to be lifted for those products that are tested in Indonesia, tested here again in the United States, meeting standards for quality and purity so that the consumers are protected. This is a very complex, big issue. Thailand is aggressively, they see the opportunity, they see the disarray in Indonesia, and we've had great conversations with Thai government officials where they want to partner with the AKA, some of which they're asking us things that we can't do, but some of it we can, where they want to be the partner to ensure the standards are met for harvesting so that we can trace back to the farm where the contaminated kratom, if it tests with a contaminant, where that came from. And that's a very important issue to the FDA. So if we can do traceability and we can have good harvesting and manufacturing standards, processing standards, and then get it to port, then I think we can make the argument. And by the way, the Thai government says, hey, we can supply whenever the United States needs. And they've actually shipped, there have been shipments from Indonesia that just went to the Netherlands, and it shows you how complicated all of this kind of thing is. But we're working hard on this, and I've spent middle of the night calls over in Indonesia and Thailand, far too many than I like, having these discussions, but we're working hard to protect that supply chain. We're hoping that people come to their senses and we work together towards a good solution.
Excellent. Mac, I just want to interject here. Before we forget, I want to give an exciting announcement here for folks. I like to try to do a little different announcement with each one of these webinars to keep it entertaining. We are doing an October fundraiser at the American Kratom Association, help raise funds, obviously for the WHO project, but then also as we lead into the upcoming year with the very aggressive KCPA strategy we have across multiple states across the country. So we have partnered with a manufacturer to create a limited run of official American Kratom Association blender bottles. And we only have a few of these. And so what we're doing is for the first 75 donations of $175 or more, you will receive one of these official American Kratom Association limited edition blender bottles. So starting tonight with this call, the first 75 folks to donate $175 or more will get one of these fantastic blender bottles. I'm probably, well, I know I'm going to have to give this one. I can't keep this one. So one of you will actually get this one in the mail, and we will send this to you as our thanks to all of you. We also have a couple more beyond 75, so we are going to do a raffle. If anyone who donates more than 50, you'll be put into a raffle for one of these blender bottles. So it's our way of saying thank you to all the folks who are constant AKA supporters. These are absolutely high quality, and they look pretty cool too. So I wanted to interject that. Just go to our website, americankratom.org, donate. We're also going to be sending out an email tomorrow. If you don't have a chance to donate tonight, we'll be sending out an email tomorrow with more information. But again, we have 75 that we'll give away to the first 75 folks who donate. With that, I think we're coming to an end here. I wanted to give everyone one last chance to make any comments before we end the call. David and Jeff, David, do you have any comments that you'd like before we end the call tonight?
Just really how important it is we can all do our part, and all of you are doing it. And just make sure, do it tomorrow. Remind your lawmaker, call them, tell them your story, make sure they know about it. Because look, the biggest obstacle we have, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this, that most people have no idea what we're talking about. When we talk about kratom, we have to educate them. And if we have a couple knocks at it, if we have people doing it multiple times, it helps all of us. So that's my push from my end as we're trying to get this done state by state. The biggest thing we can do is talk to our individual lawmakers, and that will go so far. So don't wait. It's so easy. Just pick up the phone and call them, and it will really make a big difference. And please, and donate. The link is right there in the chat. We need all the help we can get. Obviously, we have a big push right now, but we've got to keep that momentum up. I feel really good about our chances of getting the KCPA passed in multiple states this year. We've made great progress. As COVID subsides, I think we'll have more access to more lawmakers. And I think the silver lining as well is that we've collected over 80,000 comments in preparation of the World Health Organization, and that's helped us get this story out, that people aren't sitting back, that they're telling the story and not just keeping that with themselves. So that's it. Thanks everyone for being here tonight, and look forward to getting this done with all of you.
Thank you, David. Jeff, do you have any comments you'd like to make before we finish?
Excuse me, thanks, Pete. Just to amplify what David just said, 100% agree with everything you just said, and a reminder to everyone that, legislators at every level of government don't hear from a lot of their constituents on very many issues. And when they do these days, often it's, some kind of either a form letter or email, or they're getting blasted by some group. But if you are personally in touch, you're going to end up, it's unlikely that you're going to end up speaking, at least right away, with your representative. Don't sweat that. Staff make the world go round. Talk to the staff, make yourself available to staff for the future. They will appreciate that because they don't have enough time to focus on everything that they're being asked to focus on. So if you can be their local contact for this issue, that will matter a lot. They will because they want to and because they have to pay attention to the information that you provide. You never know if that's going to tip the scales, but if you don't do it, you know for sure that it won't tip the scales. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. Senator Bramble, do you have any final comments before we end?
I want to echo what both Jeff and David said, but I want to point out the vast majority of state legislators in this country are part-time. As a matter of fact, the vast majority are not like New York, California, and Texas with a lot of staff. Here in Utah, I could introduce my staff. Her name is Siri. She resides inside my iPhone. And I make that joke, but the vast majority of legislators are part-time. They have their own careers, families, they have a lot going on, and they don't have staff. That's why it's so important that you reach out and touch them, that you find a way, find an opportunity to tell a story and touch them with that. We're going to win this battle. It's going to be a hard-fought battle, but we're winning at every turn. But it takes every one of us, everyone on this call. So thank you very much, Pete. Thanks, Mac, for putting this together.
Thank you so much. And finally, Mac, do you have any comments you'd like to make before we end tonight?
I was asked on a podcast a couple of weeks ago who the most influential person was in my political life. I had started out as a 25-year-old kid running Orrin Hatch's campaign for the United States Senate. And I've interacted with a variety of candidates and public officials throughout the year, including President Reagan, who was a great mentor of mine. And so there are lots of choices on there. But I thought about it for a second, and I told this podcaster, I said, the most influential person to me in my political career was a woman named Sarah Willoughby, who lived in a little town called Manti, Utah. And when I was running Orrin Hatch's campaign, she had sent a contribution to Senator Hatch. And one of my jobs, because we didn't have many people working, was to collect money at the end of the day. And I opened this envelope, and she had a letter with a $5 bill in it. And in the letter, she described that she was 78 years old, that she lived on Social Security, and she had to spend so much money for her house payment, so much for food, so much for medical bills. And she said, I really don't have anything left, but I decided to give $5 of my food money to help this candidate because I believe in America. That's what she said. I mean, it brought tears to me. I'm a 25-year-old kid, a college kid. I'm thinking, man, it made me cry. This woman was so sincere, and it was one of the greatest moments of my life to be able to deliver that $5 back to her. And she asked if she could hug me. And I had a replicating experience when I was in Mississippi at a legislative hearing, and one of our advocates, and I won't embarrass her by saying her name, came up to me and told me that she couldn't afford to make a contribution, but she could show up. And obviously that was a sacrifice. Time away from her family or her job, to get gas to get there. I mean, this was a sacrifice. And I had a chance to hug her too. And those two people were the most influential people in my political life because they are committed to something they believe in. And I see it all the time. So I thank every one of the Kratom advocates, those of you that are on this call, listening to this, who commit your time, who show your interest, who show that you're willing to stand up for what you believe in, because this is a fight about freedom. This is about a philosophy of government that we've simply got to fight back so that we can take control of the decisions about our health and well-being. So I honor you. I'm glad to be standing shoulder to shoulder with you. I'm glad to have those hugs, not from David or Kurt. I don't want to hug them. But I can tell you that you've inspired me. And I think that that's why when we get up in the morning, we think about what can we do to fight this battle more effectively. It's that kind of inspiration that comes from us. So thanks to every one of you. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you, Mac, and thank you for everyone to be on the call tonight. Look for that email. We'll have some additional information. Wish everyone luck next week, and we will follow this up with a detailed report of how next week goes. Thank you for your support, and have a great evening. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.